All right, so me and you usually end up doing a series at some point, and oftentimes in this October one when we're doing horror movies, and we were trying to figure out what we could do now, and yeah, obviously there's a couple of series I'll be doing after this. I have no idea how I'm going to cram those in, but I'll work it out. But in the meantime, I figured a good one for us would be this, which is another one of those things I'm really surprised in all these years this channel hasn't touched yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, and yeah, so I don't really know if there's much of a starting place. I was trying to remember. I remember vividly the first time I saw Evil Dead, the original. Obviously, we won't be talking about the remake, but I did a somewhat review of it. I talked about the remake back when I was still writing out reviews and Owen was just reading them on camera,
Mm.
which feels like an eternity ago.
Mm.
And I wasn't that big on the remake, but I remember vividly the first time I saw the original because I don't know that I have ever been more grossed out in my life than I was the first time I saw the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to remember when you first saw them. Was it that summer of 2012 when you like stayed here for a week
Oh, I'm not sure.
and we watched them? I'm thinking that's when it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and do you remember much about your apart from location? As far as your initial reaction, do you remember much about when you first saw the first one or the trilogy itself?
I think I think at the end of each one, I have the same thought. And that thought that runs through my mind is, what the fuck did I just watch?
Yeah, that's also kind of a staple of Raimi just in general.
Mhm.
But this especially.
I
Uh,
I would love to see Raimi tackle Spider-Man in the style of Evil Dead.
yeah, there's still little tiny occasional moments in the Spider-Man trilogy where you can kind of see classic Raimi coming out, but they're kind of
The
brief.
one I think of is Doc Ock in the surgery room.
Yeah, and some of the more outlandish stuff with Willem Dafoe in the first movie.
Yeah.
It's, like the random jump scares that are in the first Spider-Man has like multiple jump scares in it, which is weird.
Let's not forget that just Bruce Campbell in general makes an appearance.
Yes.
I do love how
And
he does something different in every movie.
yeah, which honestly kind of falls in line with Ash as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Because it's funny because we're kind of dealing with three different versions of him throughout this series.
Yeah. And
Because the first movie takes itself somewhat seriously.
yeah, I was gonna say what's really interesting about the first movie in particular. I mean, I guess you could say it about all of them, but you can really notice it in the first one because, to my understanding, the first one was played pretty straight faced, like when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
Like 1981 audiences were like horrified by it.
Yeah.
But it's like when you watch it now and knowing what we know, it's kind of hard. It's a movie that feels like it's impossible to categorize.
Yeah.
Because it's like was the first one self-aware or wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was just discussing this with a friend recently because we were talking about The Stuff, the movie from like 1985,
Mm-hmm.
and I was saying that self-awareness and horror seemed to really like be in the mainstream when stuff like Scream was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So the 90s kind of gets all the credit for the era where horror started becoming self-aware, but it's like there was a ton of self-aware horror going on in the 80s already.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say Raimi was probably a big factor in the kind of early parts of that, assuming that there was something a bit self-aware going on in the original movie or not.
Would you classify him as a pioneer?
Oh, I would say so, especially in the sense of like Cabin in the Woods movies.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of them end up coming back to Evil Dead, which is really interesting because when you look at stuff like the movie Cabin in the Woods,
Mm-hmm.
which
Which is funny because the rapey tree and the Deadites are on board.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the whole idea of reading the book, bringing them to life.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing, it's interesting to me that the movie Cabin in the Woods is like talking about all of the cliches, like having all the different character types and like the order in which they die in and all that stuff and all the things they have to do before they die and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that Evil Dead is so much of like a focus in what's also parodied there, because apart from being a horror movie involving a cabin in the woods and being set in a cabin in the woods, everything else in Evil Dead is really unique.
Mm-hmm.
And like, because it's not like specific character types, and they don't seem to like follow by any particular rules in how they die or anything. And what's also really interesting is how quickly it's whittled down to just one person left, because with the concept, if the characters weren't going fast, there wouldn't be much of a threat, because the already existing characters end up being the threat.
Yeah.
So that's interesting how it's kind of evolved into that. And when you think of a Cabin in the Woods movie, you automatically think of like, something like Friday the 13th,
Mm-hmm.
which the first Friday the 13th had already come out just the year before. But as far as thinking like, because I feel like there's a slight difference between your average Friday the 13th movie and a Cabin in the Woods type movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's usually like, when I think of a Cabin in the Woods movie, I think of one cabin in the middle of nowhere with just a small group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where obviously Friday the 13th movies, people kind of come in and out and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously that was like, 11 movies to go through a lot of ground. But as far as that particular like representation of that cliche is what I think of. But like I said, when you think of it as a cliche, there's really not much of that in Evil Dead. Because
No, and it's like you said, the characters that get offed end up becoming the threat, but it's not like a zombie movie where like there's zombies to look out for and the zombies turn them. It's just this invisible force that just starts taking characters out.
yeah, because when you talk about, we're unsure if Raimi was already going into, because it's unquestionable by the time we get to the second movie.
Mm-hmm.
But the second movie is pretty much the reason we question now.
Yeah.
But was he always going in a comedy direction, even up to the first one? But it's like there's a lot of genuinely creepy stuff in the first one,
Mm-hmm.
many of which come from those point of view shots.
Yeah.
Whether it be the unseen force or whether it be when she's like under the cellar and we just kind of see a point of view as she's looking out at them.
Yeah.
And we're also getting reactions like when she starts freaking out, saying like what happened to her eyes and stuff like that. That's like genuinely terrifying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this really interesting mix up, which, like I said, is, I think it's why plays a big part in why it's so hard to categorize.
Yeah. And it's also funny too because Ash isn't really he's not really that iconic in the first one. Like there's not a lot to him.
Yeah, it's like if you go in not knowing, like if you know nothing about Evil Dead and you go into the first movie, you probably just assume that he's one of the characters that wouldn't make it because he's just there.
Yeah.
And he's got the girlfriend he's very close to, which usually is a death sentence.
Yeah.
But the great thing about that too is like, even the moments when they're like being all innocent, like when he's gonna gift her the necklace,
Mm-hmm.
even that, like when he's pretending to sleep, is shot like a horror movie.
Yeah.
Even though he's just like playing with her, and we know that, but still, just the way it's shot gives it that feel that blends in with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, talking about it being seemingly being the beginnings of some things, there's also clearly a lot of stuff that Raimi was trying to kind of evoke. Mainly that stands out is like the gore itself. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of think of like Italian movies, like Fulci movies or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can see a huge influence there because this movie's fucking disgusting. This movie is actually NC-17 technically for its gore, which I found very intimidating the first time, because I was at a young age when I watched it, and as I mentioned many times before, and you definitely know, at a young age, I was extremely squeamish.
Mm-hmm.
So this was an intimidating movie to go into. And even being from 1981, the fact that it can still be like, we can see like what effects are what. Like when he stabs her in the heel, like we can tell what's going on there effects wise, but it's still hard to look at.
Yeah.
Which in a movie like this is like a compliment, because it's like kind of the main show is the
Mm-hmm.
gore.
Yeah.
But there is still also some stuff that kind of has some generally creepy vibes. We talked about the point of view shots. There's also the way sound is used. Like how there's some creepy uses of sound here that almost replace score.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they first get there and it's like the swing bumping against the wall on the porch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like we talked about this with Halloween before, where it's when Laurie walks up to the Myers house and the score is playing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like in the moment you would expect the score to intensify, it just stops completely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's a very similar moment here when the swing is hitting up against the wall. And when he goes up to the door, you would expect things to get more intense, and the swing just fucking stops. And it's like stuff like that I can really appreciate just as much as the gore, probably, as far as accomplishing what it was setting out to do as a horror movie, if that's what he was entirely out to do.
I'm sorry, I just thought of this thing that I saw online that somebody made. You brought up Halloween, and it was a picture of when Michael Myers is standing like off in the bushes away from Laurie, and it's like that far away shot, and he has his mask on, and somebody turned that into a meme, and it said, even Michael Myers knows to wear a mask and social distance.
I don't know why, but the funnier part of that to me isn't the mask thing, but the social distance. Because remember, Linda runs towards the bush and he's gone.
Yeah. Michael Myers don't play. But anyway, sorry that you brought up Halloween and it took me on that little detour I thought you'd appreciate.
But yeah, speaking of killers, though,
Mm-hmm.
what's also interesting about this movie, and how I was saying how unique that it is you brought up the raping tree, I guess we're going to call it.
I mean, what else do you call it?
Man, this after Dorothy took those apples off it got really fucking pissed this time.
I saw something really, really bad that somebody has nicknamed that tree. They pointed out that it's most likely a teen that tree rapes. So I've actually seen online where somebody called that tree Epstein.
Oh God. I mean it's there. The wordplay works. But what I was getting to was
I just want to know if this tree, the tree from Lord of the Rings and the tree from Wizard of Oz, like all used to be friends, and now they're not friends with the rapey tree anymore.
He was the one that got too carried away.
Yeah. The one tree from Wizard of Oz is like, I just throw apples. We don't rape anyone.
So I was getting at was
that was a needless tangent, but go on.
Talking what it is this movie offering up the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, once again, put yourself in the shoes of somebody going in for the first time. And so you've got this idea of a cabin in the woods movie, and you're like, well, I've heard it might be a zombie thing or it might be a possession thing. And then it's like, but I've seen other movies. Maybe there's a killer thing going on. I don't know. You're going into it for the first time or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
At what point are you ever expecting the raping tree in that scenario?
I don't know, but I just had another thought.
Oh God.
Another tangent that we're going on.
Do we live in fear?
What if, because Evil Dead takes place in Tennessee, right?
I'm not sure I remember that.
I think it's Tennessee.
But we'll go with that.
It's in America. What if the rapey tree is Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas assigning a minion to take out revenge on the whites for what they did to the Native American people.
Doing videos with you is so risky. I'm learning this quicker and quicker each time. But yes, that could be something else. We could, if you want to branch out into this weird fucked up cinematic universe, sure.
You know I'm all about connecting things. Hey, in my defense, in Terrence Malick's The New World, it probably would have been the rapey tree and not Grandmother Willow.
I love that somehow we started at Evil Dead and we have somehow gotten to Malick's The New World.
Such is the life of inviting me to do a video. I'm waiting for one day. I'm waiting to push it too far and you rescind my invitation.
Like the video just abruptly ends. Yet it's for some reason posted. But yes, much like the tangents you bring up, because we tend to know the movie so well, we tend to forget what was probably totally and completely out of left field when somebody was going into this movie in, say, 1981.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and obviously this was an early start for there was a lot of time in like the 80s there in the early 90s where the Coen brothers and Raimi were kind of crossing paths a lot, where I think Joel Coen is like an assistant editor on this or something.
Mm-hmm.
And Raimi's popped up in a couple of their movies, and they've kind of done some behind the scenes work for each other. And they like lived together for a little bit there, I think, something to that extent. So it's interesting to also see the beginnings of it in that sort of way, where if you go back to the Coen brothers, who have now won more Oscars than they can hold, as they leave a ceremony, you can bring their beginnings back to a movie like this. And a movie that definitely feels so incredibly independent.
Mm-hmm.
Yet when you see just how well done the gore and the makeup are, it still somehow looks expensive. It looks a lot more expensive than it actually is.
Do you know what it kind of gives off the vibe of? If, like, as far as the way it's made, except for the effects, the way it's shot and everything, it kind of gives off a straight to Netflix vibe, almost.
Yeah, I could probably see that. Or the kind of those movies that you can buy in the horror packs, like 20 at a time.
Yeah.
Where they all look like they were made in somebody's backyard and they're all shit.
Mm-hmm. Except this one's not.
Yeah, and it's like there's that. I really just think it's that production quality of, like, they found one thing they were they knew they could really pull off in the gore and the makeup.
Mm-hmm.
And they went with it. But it just so happens that Raimi is a talented enough filmmaker and was back then. I think he had just turned 20.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the fact that he could still do the really atmospheric thing while having that main centerpiece of, this is like, the gore is going to be what gets the attention of people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like we can actually do all the other stuff also, which obviously, I think I was reading somewhere where it's weird how it's like it's the same numbers, just kind of more, where this was made for like 350,000 like at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Spider-Man 3 was close to that in like the million territory when you throw in all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like to think how massive his opportunities became when you look back on this.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that really makes it stand out is that it's all three of these are very short. None of them break an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And yet all of them really, but you can start with this one, waste no time. Like I don't know that I can think of a minute that is wasted in this one.
And there's, especially when you get to the second one.
Yeah.
Because whatever takes an hour to do in the first one took 10 minutes in the second one.
Yeah, because usually even like shitty movies of this ilk tend to build up their characters a lot. Like
Mhm.
like when you watch Friday the 13th movies, a large portion, a very large portion of all Friday the 13th movies are the characters just fucking around
Mhm.
before they get killed. Which honestly, if you're like me and see those movies as a guilty pleasure, you could see some genuinely decent character development when they're doing that, even in those movies.
Mhm.
But it's like the carnage in this movie is happening. Like the moment when the trap door opens by itself,
Yeah.
which is pretty much the start of the shit hitting the fan,
Mhm.
is 10 minutes in.
Mm.
And we just get little scenes here and there, like the scene when he gives her the necklace, or the scene when they're playing like the card game.
Mhm.
And that's all we really need. And we got Scott walking around in the basement and doing the jumping out of the door. And the thing about that is the scene where they're playing cards ends up being like the most chilling scene of the movie, at least to me, I think.
Mhm.
When she's naming off the cards and what their suits are, and then she's looking off and just starts saying them before we realize she's fully possessed at this point.
Mhm.
That is terrifying every time. So like I said, that's also interesting as well when we were talking about how, is it self-aware or not, but the fact that it already does work so well as a horror movie,
Mhm.
like, does it matter how you categorize it,
Mhm.
as long as it's really working as a horror movie when it is, and if it's doing something that may be intentionally cheesy or something like that, if as long as it's doing that well also, then that's just what it is.
Mhm.
So, and then there's actually, like, we were talking a little bit about this, but like the creativity and how it's made. Like obviously not just the gore, but like some of the shots also. Like there's that shot towards the end when we're going over Ash's head, and it like starts upside down and then like comes right side up over him.
Mhm.
And have you ever noticed that shot of him when they pull up to the bridge after he sees that it's not there?
Mm.
And it's like he's kind of tilted at a weird angle as he's walking forward.
Mhm.
And it's like apparently what they did, like the first time I saw that, I just assumed I was like either seeing things or if it just looked weird from the angle or whatever. But apparently they shot it intentionally in a way to where like the car was on like an incline
Mhm.
and he was walking normally, but they just tilted it the other way to make it look like the car was normal and he was tilted that way.
Oh,
And it's like that's stuff like that really stands out and kind
that's
of
really
shows just how,
creative.
yeah. And it's like,
Mm.
especially when you've got like such a low budget, it's like to be able to use it in that way, really says something about the filmmaker behind it,
Mhm.
especially when they had just turned 20. So there's also, what do you also think about how it's kind of surprisingly goes into some psychological territory from time to time?
Yeah, it does. It's a movie that's, like you said, it's really hard to classify because it goes so many different directions.
Yeah, because you get that little moment there where it kind of looks like after the raping tree scene has happened, if they're even going to believe her.
Mhm.
So we get that moment where her and Ash get in the car right before they find out that the bridge is gone,
Yeah.
and the car won't start in true horror movie fashion.
Mhm.
And she's saying like, I know it's like we're in like the full, like it's almost like she's aware that they're in a horror movie now. And she's like, the car's not going to start. I can tell you right now, the car's not going to start. And that's when it does start.
Mhm.
So it's like the person that actually seems almost aware that they're in a movie now seems
Yeah,
crazy.
'cause she even talks about, she's like, it's not gonna let us leave.
Yeah. And also the way like Ash's emotions come into it from time to time. Like apparently originally, like we were talking about how fast paced it is and how none of them break an hour and a half.
Mhm.
but I can actually see this working, and I feel like we get little slight glimpses of it. Apparently, there was an original cut of the movie that was almost 2 hours, and that was because they put a lot more into like the way Ash responded to everybody dying
Mhm.
and having to basically kill them also.
Yeah.
And that would have been, I mean, I can see why it doesn't have to be there, but it's always interesting when horror movies actually think to go into that, because there's so many, like like when you think of slasher movies, like the Friday the 13th movies,
Mhm.
which is the example we'll keep using, I guess. It's like you actually start to think about that if you watch those movies enough, where it's like you get so used to like, oh, this character's gonna die this way, and ooh, that was a creative death, or ooh, that was a gruesome death. You never think about, so what's the grieving process after this?
Mhm.
It's
Well,
like, how many?
also, you think of like a zombie movie. How many zombie movies have you seen where like somebody has to take out a loved one, and it's like a really hard scene? Even Shaun of the Dead went there.
I was gonna say Shaun of the and Edgar Wright is so good. Shaun of the Dead's actually one of the first things I think of when I think of that. And that movie's a fucking comedy.
Yeah. Um, but you got to think, in a lot of zombie movies, that's a popular scene where somebody has to kill one loved one. Ash has to kill everyone that came. He doesn't get to share that responsibility,
Yeah.
it's a very unique thing for a character to go through, and it's no wonder he goes insane.
Yeah, because we even think maybe Scott will hang around a little longer than he does, and then just gone.
It's kind of like at the beginning of Evil Dead 2 when they show up and he's got his girlfriend with him, and it's just those two. And it's like, oh, the movie's going to be about those two fighting. She's gone in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much what happened to her in the first one on fast forward.
Yeah, because there is that whole thing where are we transitioning into the second one?
I mean, the first and second one kind of bleed together.
Yeah, because I don't think I have anything else to say about the first one that at least I was planning on saying.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, where exactly do you stand on the beginning of Evil Dead 2?
I
Like
mean,
that
I'm not
first 5 minutes.
sure. I've never been sure what Evil Dead 2 is supposed to be. Like,
Well,
it's very weird how, like, the movie starts like nothing has ever happened, but we're down two people. We only have two this time. And then we do what we did in the first one all within 10 minutes.
yeah, to my understanding, and I depending on what I've read, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But because it feels like it could be anything. But
Mm-hmm.
to my understanding, a lot of people call it a remake of itself,
Mm-hmm.
which obviously isn't true, because after the first 5 minutes, it picks up where the first one left off.
Yeah.
But apparently, what it was in another scenario, it would have just been footage from the first movie to recap, and they would pick up right where it left off of Ash getting, pushed down into the woods.
Kind of like what Army of Darkness does.
Yeah, but apparently they couldn't get the rights to use footage from the first movie, so they had to. So they're like, all right, then we'll just have to do this ourselves. But and I'm curious about the choice of like making it an entirely different feel. Like Ash already feels like a different. He feels much smoother than he did. It almost feels like what we're seeing in the first 5 minutes of Evil Dead 2 is the Ash from the first movie fantasizing about what he thought he looked like.
Yeah.
And then we go from there, and that's just Ash's character from then on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
We
yeah.
kind of do it again with Army of Darkness.
Yeah. Oh, also worth noting, apparently somebody that we really have to thank for Evil Dead 2 existing is somebody that I have been talking about all year on this channel.
Which is?
Apparently Stephen King really loved the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he played a big part in the first movie getting popularity, because once he endorsed it, they were able to use that in like marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was having like a meeting with Dino De Laurentiis, the producer, because they were making Maximum Overdrive.
Mm-hmm.
And King was very adamant about, if there was going to be a sequel to Evil Dead, that it needs to be made.
Mm-hmm.
So he told the producer that, and the producer that was basically like the starting point of Evil Dead 2 getting made.
Hmm.
And it's like, so basically, apparently one major reason we have Evil Dead 2 is because Stephen King was a major fanboy. And who better to have as a fanboy for a movie like that?
Mm-hmm.
And to be championing for this movie to be made. So as we talked about, we're changing tones seemingly entirely. Like I've heard some people say that some people claim this is a remake of the first movie, and I've heard some people claim that this is Raimi and Bruce Campbell basically wanting to do a parody of themselves, like make their movie and then do a parody of their own movie.
Mm-hmm.
Which I can kind of see that lingering around.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could probably easily buy that. But it also just feels like they knew, because talking about going as balls to the wall as possible, you would think there wouldn't be much room left to go after the first movie, especially since we're still in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, all right, so we just got to come up with more crazy shit. But like, still, like the first movie, make the crazy shit the entire thing with hardly any breathing room.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the only breathing room we have is building up the characters that eventually get out to the cabin.
Yeah.
Which isn't much when you look at the whole total of the runtime.
Mm-mm.
And I think this one's the longest one at an hour 28. That's so what?
If Raimi could have got the rights to his own movie, it probably would have been even shorter.
Yeah, or it would have been Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, and half the movie was just archive footage.
Yeah.
Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 is probably more than 50% archive footage, actually, but that's not worth going into.
Damn.
So, oh yeah, that's not an exaggeration.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, that whole Garbage Day thing you've probably seen on YouTube by itself
Oh yeah.
is one of like 3 or 4 scenes in that movie that's not just archive footage from the original or the first one. But yeah, so when we talk about the crazy, what's really interesting about these movies also that we talked about the effects and like the makeup and the gore and all that,
Mm-hmm.
but also the use of like stop motion
Yeah.
is especially utilized here.
Especially like when his girlfriend comes out of the ground and she's dancing and like her head rolls up and
Yeah, because that's what I think of when it's like, all right, we're pretty much at the start of our movie. We've established where we are, so let's start the crazy shit. So it's like, let's just bring out the craziest looking imagery we can find, and the body without the head coming out of the ground and dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Logical first step. If that's the plan, that's one of the most logical first steps you could possibly come up with. And then, like we were saying, it's pretty much nonstop, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And it's like, I would probably put Evil Dead 2 on that list, that ever-growing list of movies you wish you could go back and see for the first time again.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, we were talking about the first movie using the unexpected, and it's like, well, if you expect this kind of thing from that kind of movie, then you don't expect this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we were able to bring up examples like the tree, but yeah, for Evil Dead 2, it's the whole fucking thing.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but almost every one of those is an iconic scene in horror now.
Yeah.
If not movie history itself.
I also love the shortcut that instead of reading the book, it's just recited on tape.
Yeah. Yeah, I do love that moment that kind of goes against another thing that kind of goes against what we know about the supposed cliche is it's like we expect them to read the book like an idiot would do But it's like, oh well, they're just barely paying attention. The tape's just playing itself and causing this to happen. Like, oops, that was unintentional. I do like there's some stuff where there's obvious callbacks, but there's also stuff that's kind of almost feels like visual callbacks. Like the moment when the blood hits the light bulb and everything goes red.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of feels like the really great moment in the first movie when the blood was on the projector.
Yeah.
And it just kind of looks like the blood's like running down the wall and then over him.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to think that's a callback to that sort of image.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as we said, just goes in completely different. Well, not so much completely different, but I mean, because it's like, if I remember correctly, they didn't like Raimi and them didn't have the idea initially for this to have a sequel at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it was basically just that sort of generic horror movie ending where in 1981, the last shot of the first movie was just, we're just assuming Ash is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just going to be left at that. But it's like, now it's like, well, maybe he wouldn't, I mean, obviously a possession would have to happen the way it happened with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to go from that, how do we handle that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like one body part at a time. And it's like perfect. It's actually quite ingenious, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And what better way? Because yeah, other movies would come out later that kind of had the same concept at feature length, like Idle Hands.
Mm-hmm.
But for the entirety of Idle Hands, because this is a very entertaining movie, and to think that its entire plot is just a fraction of what's going on in Evil Dead 2, like 10 years prior, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just all these just this whole portion of the movie that's just Bruce Campbell fighting himself.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with that really cool shot with the mirror when he jumps through it and attacks himself. And then like the physicality in this performance is something to behold. And like I said, the comedy just seamlessly comes into it because there's hardly a way, much like Idle Hands. It's like, is there a way to do that concept without it being funny? I mean, because Oliver Stone made The Hand with Michael Caine, but that movie was straight-faced, but unintentionally kind of hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not the finest hour for either of those people.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea that they just kind of embrace it. And it's like, we're just a comedy now. And
I wonder if people like Chris Farley or Jim Carrey, when they were doing physical comedy, ever took any inspiration from that scene.
Are you thinking about the pen scene in Liar Liar?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's exactly what that scene is. I honestly never thought to equate the two, but yeah, that's exactly what Carrie's doing.
Yeah.
Oh man, I really hope that's I want to run with that. I really hope that was like a direct inspiration for Carrie. It had to have been. And there's also there's little things in there that are just funny, like after he gets the idea to cut his hand off, because I mean, what else are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
Even Devon Sawa knew that. But it's like when he's got it under the can and he's stacking books on it to hold it down, and the book on the top is A Farewell to Arms. That's hilarious. Like I really don't care who you are. That's one of the funniest things ever.
I think what really makes this movie work too is we know we're in a comedy. Everybody knows we're in a comedy. But Bruce Campbell plays it straight as an arrow.
Yeah.
Until we get toward the end.
Yeah, there's one moment that comes to mind when you say that.
Mm-hmm.
It's when he's when the hand's like leaving and it flips him off,
Mm-hmm.
that face that he makes doesn't just feel like he's mugging for comedy's sake. He looks genuinely offended that, that his own hand just flipped him off.
So what? So before we go on, overall, what do you think of Bruce Campbell in these movies?
I think the genius of it is what we were talking about, where it kind of feels like a different character from movie to movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the character of Ash is seen so seamlessly. Like, did you ever? I'm surprised it's taken us this long to bring this up. Did you ever watch Ash versus Evil Dead?
No, did you?
No,
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know what effect that would have on what we're talking about now. But I figure it should be addressed that neither one of us are familiar with that. So just going on the 3 movies by themselves. Yeah, the fact that it almost feels like 3 different characters, yet somehow there's something that just works from movie to movie to where that's not something we really think about or really care about.
Mm-hmm.
Because we trust him enough to follow his charisma wherever we're going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, by the time we get to Army of Darkness, there's more than one of him. There's many of him by the time we get to Army of Darkness. And yet we can just follow him every time. And it's like, to be able to trust in following an actor go through a character like that is something that's how characters like that last as long as characters like Ash have. So, and I mean, it does kind of suck that there's not really a whole lot else to associate him with. Like, he's been around in many things. But it's like, and a lot of actors like tend to really appreciate that. If they just have one thing that they're known for, then they will gladly, carry that with them. I think the only other thing he's really widely associated for is probably Bubba Hotep, wouldn't you say?
And the Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, like as far as like leading parts or big parts or something.
Yeah.
If I
He's
remember
in
correctly,
Congo. He dies early in Congo.
if I remember correctly, I think I was reading that Army of Darkness, being under a major studio like Universal, is like the only time ever he was like the lead in a big studio movie. Yeah. How convenient is this to have the shelves to just whip off the examples I'm referring to? As
long as they begin starting at A and go through like F, it'll be convenient.
Yeah, well, the eyes are here, and then all the other shelves over there. That you usually see when doing these. I've moved locations for this, but yeah. So what else were we gonna say? I was talking about. It's interesting also when they made the transition to comedy, the kind of stuff that is funny now. Because there are things in Evil Dead 2 that are funny that if the exact same thing happened in the first movie, it'd probably be scarier because the context. Like, maybe it's just me. Am I wrong that it's hilarious in Evil Dead 2 when he gets sprayed by the blood out of the walls? I mean, that's funny, right?
How it starts red and then it just becomes black.
Which, to my understanding, they did that for rating purposes, and it didn't matter anyway. They had to go unrated still anyway. But yeah, like I was saying though, you have all these scenes, these really big scenes, and then you have scenes like when he, like, I mean, it's even in a comedic perspective, it's always going to get you pumped when he turns his arm into the chainsaw, and he like saws off the shotgun and all that, and he's just groovy. But then there's also scenes like where everything starts laughing, where like the furniture's laughing, the deer head is laughing, and it's adding all this stuff up, and it's like it's
like if Pee-wee's Playhouse decided to commit murder.
Yeah. It's like it's Pee-wee's Playhouse inside of a nightmare. which is kind of hard to say because Pee-wee's Playhouse is already a little bit nightmarish, but but yeah, when it's not until I'm like watching it and adding them up that I remember just how many iconic scenes are in this. But yeah, it's insane, and it's like when I just to stay on Raimi and how well he knows this genre and how well he can handle this genre. I talked about Drag Me to Hell a few years ago, and there's a particular scene. There's a particular scene in Drag Me to Hell that I described as horror fan Viagra. Once again, that's probably just the whole movie of Evil Dead 2, isn't it? Because I'm talking about. I mean, you could say that about Drag Me to Hell, but I was specifically talking about the seance scene in Drag Me to Hell. But like, I feel like the seance scene in Drag Me to Hell, as crazy as the rest of the movie is, basically is what the entire movie of Evil Dead 2 feels like. Because Drag Me to Hell was absolutely Raimi going. Like Raimi had the big Spider-Man movies and really mainstream and really big budget, and Drag Me to Hell was him going back into this Raimi.
With all that money.
What's that?
With all that money.
Yeah. and it was back to even Drag Me to Hell went back into the whole you can never quite tell what's horror and what's funny. It's like is it one, is it the other, or is it both? It's because of that, Drag Me to Hell had to like grow on me. But when it did, it was like once Drag Me to Hell is one of those movies where once you get it, it's like a big revelatory thing. It's like I see what he's doing now. Yeah.
Kind of like when LA Confidential clicked for you when you understood the I can't remember the name. The name that he made up, huh?
The Rollo Tomasi thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you went from LA Confidential is okay to LA Confidential was brilliant.
Yeah, because it was like obviously Raimi diehards obviously took to Drag Me to Hell, and I was like, I don't really get the big deal. It's kind of overrated. And then it was like when I really kind of got, and I think it was after I had watched the Evil Dead trilogy again. You know, the first time I saw them, I was at probably too young of an age to know exactly to be able to dissect exactly what Raimi was doing. But it's like once you establish what he was doing with the Evil Dead trilogy, then it's like whatever he did from then on, it's like, oh, I see what's going on here. Even Darkman has a lot of those moments as well. So Darkman's always kind of something that kind of goes under the radar a little bit, seemingly on his filmography, unless you're talking to the people that like really know him.
Now, if I don't want to sound stupid asking this, but Darkman is Liam Neeson and The Shadow is Alec Baldwin, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and obviously another person that's always going to be popping up is his brother Ted Raimi.
Yeah.
Who people probably remember from he worked with Jameson in the Spider-Man movies.
Yeah.
And I love that you can see him everywhere.
It's kind of like James Gunn and his brother.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. Like you can see him in his actual form at the S-Mart at the end of Army of Darkness. And he's all around Army of Darkness, but I don't know why, but I love that he plays Henrietta in Evil Dead 2. And despite all of the makeup and effects, you can tell. Like you can see him. And I love that you can see him. Because it's always great. It's a lot of people say they can get tired of it from time to time, but I love the directors that are always bringing back those people, especially those people that you usually only see in their movies, like Sean Gunn and James Gunn. And it's like the thing where every time you see a James Gunn movie, you know that Sean Gunn is going to be some motion capture character. And it's like, and he'll occasionally show his face.
Like that famous video that got out of him walking alongside the Avengers in Endgame, and he's like squatted down and walking.
Yeah, and it's like the same thing where it's like when you watch these, it's like you just kind of play spot Ted Raimi, and you may be able to spot him more than once. So, what else was I going to say? I also love that even though we're kind of going into like the totally absurd, there's still moments it has of freshness where like like it toys with the audience's expectations. Where like there's a moment where Jake, who is played by the actor Dan Hicks, who we actually just lost in June of this year to cancer.
Mm. Yeah, fuck
And
this year.
that.
I said, yeah,
Yeah.
fuck this year. Tried to take Jeff Bridges too.
And it's the scene where he's screaming for Bobby Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this really great thing with the editing. It's sort of like we were talking about with the swing against the wall in the first movie, where it's when he's screaming out for Bobby Joe, and it's cutting into the woods, and we can kind of see, we get that point of view shot where something's coming. And it does that classic editing technique where we cut to him and he's screaming for her. We cut back to the point of view shot. And the closer it feels like the point of view shot is getting, the quicker the edits get back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like just when it gets to the moment where it feels like they're right in front of each other and we're just waiting for it to come out of the woods and attack him, nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
At least in that moment. It eventually happens, but not in the moment we think it will. Because when you see that editing back and forth and it seems like the edits are getting smaller and smaller and they're getting closer and closer, you expect the attack immediately. And there's kind of a pause. So I thought that was really great.
Yeah.
And there's also that moment where, maybe this is just me, but it happens to me every time I watch it. The moment when Ash is screaming for them to give him his hand back.
Mm-hmm.
And we get that shot like panning, like pulling back from the window. And the thing I love about that is because Ash is looking up when he says that, it almost kind of looks like it gives you the fact that we cut to that window makes it look like we're looking up at it, like it's in the roof or something.
Mm-hmm.
But then as it like tilts and we pull back and we realize it's just a normal window, it kind of looks like it's from the inside. And then when it pulls back all the way, we realize we've been looking at the window from outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I don't even know if that was the intention, to make you not know where you are when you're looking at that shot.
Yeah, it's like the way they play with the camera. It's almost designed to disorient you, to kind of make you kind of feel like that disorientation that Ash is feeling.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know what else I can really say apart from just, like I said, the people that know this movie because almost every scene is legendary.
Yeah.
And it's like, even in a movie that doesn't even break an hour and a half, that's a hard thing to do.
The crazy thing too with these movies where, they don't even break an hour and a half, there's a lot going on. It's a very busy movie.
Yeah. Because like I have seen B movies that are only 1 hour long that have way too much time to kill.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so to be able to have a feature length movie where everything, like every second of what's on camera counts,
Mm-hmm.
is much harder to pull off than it might seem.
Yeah.
So then we get our very unexpected ending,
Mm-hmm.
which I think I heard Raimi actually wanted to do, like, pretty much what we see in Army of Darkness was supposed to be Evil Dead 2,
Mm-hmm.
but he had trouble like getting it made or financing it or something.
Mm-hmm.
So but yeah, once he got established enough to where, because like we had the first movie, which was like all them, and they had to like show it to people themselves to get word of mouth going and get an endorsement from Stephen King and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the second movie, they had financiers that had some say in what was going on, but maybe not to the extent of like a studio.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've graduated to a full-on studio movie
Mm-hmm.
with Army of Darkness coming from Universal.
And you can kind of tell because at the end of Evil Dead 2, when you see all the knights and everything, the armor that they're wearing looks so fucking cheap. It looks like Halloween costume store cheap. And then when we start Army of Darkness, there's a massive upgrade in how they're dressed.
And especially when you look at the independent place it was coming from with the first movie, it can be a bit alarming I mean, it seems like it could be a really big thing because it's like, oh, we're a studio, we've got a studio, we're established now, we're like the real deal. But of course, being under a studio also means you have a lot more people to answer to and a lot more people that have a say that may not get it in the way that back in your more independent days was a more collaborative thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you were more likely to be on the same page as everybody you were collaborating with.
Yeah.
And I can see where, for some reason, and maybe it's because it's just so different entirely, because I can actually kind of see that, because when you see Evil Dead and you see Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness doesn't exactly feel like, I mean, tonally,
Mm-hmm.
sure, Army of Darkness feels like an Evil Dead movie, but apparently the studio was hell bent on Evil Dead not being in the title.
Mm-hmm.
Because initially, I love Raimi's idea. Raimi wanted it to be called Medieval Dead.
Yeah.
It's just perfect. It writes itself.
And you can tell movies suffer whenever the studio and the makers aren't on the same page versus when they are. And I think your best modern example right now of that is the MCU versus the DCEU.
Yeah.
The MCU, Kevin Feige knows what's going on. He's in on it. And look how successful it was. The DCEU, you constantly hear arguments about how Warner Brothers forced these changes and the director got mad, so they phoned in half of it. Like, you can tell when it really affects the quality of your movie.
But at the same time, Feige is so in charge. You also hear a lot of people say there's almost no point to even have directors for those because
Yeah.
it's such a full product, which a lot of people see as a potentially bad thing as far as creativity goes.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see both sides of it. But what's interesting is, like, as far as them being hell-bent on not having the title was, they said we want it to be called Army of Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And Raimi was like, okay, cool. Evil Dead 3, Army of Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no. Just Army of Darkness. It's like Justin Timberlake walked in and said, drop the Evil Dead 3. It's cleaner. But I can kind of get that because it's so different. Like it makes sense that its title goes out of the sort of where we were.
Yeah. I mean, it's shot different. It doesn't look independent like it did. The movie has, this one's probably the one that takes the most time to do things,
Yeah,
to
but
develop things.
then once it gets going, like we do have the pit scene,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have some downtime. But once we get through the downtime after the pit scene, it's fucking nonstop.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing too. Is what I was saying was when you were talking about like how it feels different and looks different. Is it's like it's. I mean, it does feel like a Raimi movie, but as far as it feeling like an Evil Dead movie, it's like the only way you can tell is the tone.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, it's interesting how different the movie is, but how much the tone is still absolutely there.
Yeah.
But like especially when we go down that rabbit hole of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's nonstop, but I'm talking specifically about that whole chain of events where we start with the broken mirror, which leads to the tiny ashes, which leads to one of them going inside of him and coming out, which is an amazing effect, by the way. And then they're conjoined, and then they're two separate beings, and we have Bad Ash. It's like that whole rabbit hole of crazy, just by itself in this little confined area, is
and then we get to the scene where he finds the book, and one of the books like distorts his face for a minute, and he literally gets rid of it Looney Tunes style.
I was going to ask you how you feel about. We're talking about how the tone is we can tell by the tone that it's still the same world.
Mm-hmm.
The same movie world, obviously not the same world in world, if you would. But what do you think about this one being as like cartoonish and goofy as it is? Because I mean, you got you've got like this. Like, let's look at the scene in Evil Dead 2 when he's smashing the plates on his head.
Mm-hmm.
If that scene had happened in Army of Darkness, we would have gotten like Looney Tunes sound effects.
Yeah.
When did that start? Like, when in the thought process, like, when did that start being like, we should do that? Do you think that's studio or do you think that's Raimi?
I think that has to be studio.
You would think, but Raimi is so out there. I personally can't tell. Because Raimi is so willing to just say, well, we did this thing, now let's do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
That I honestly can't tell. But I don't know that it's in the movie's favor the way it was in the other ways. He's completely gone off the path of what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, it does almost feel like they were going for younger audiences with that.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it was made for younger. It feels so made for younger audiences. I often forget that it's still rated R. Because there's a few fucks set in there, and we get at least one Glenn Lance style blood spray.
That, and if I remember right, there's nudity.
Was there?
I think whenever the army is getting ready, I think there's naked women walking around. When when the dead army is getting ready, like the skeletons are all coming out of the graves and stuff. I'm pretty sure there's naked women walking around.
But you see what I mean? Where it's like, with the exception of those, like, even with those things present, you almost forget that it's not made for younger audiences, or what, or maybe it was. This we're still in what, 1992.
Yeah.
You could still make really like R-rated movies and still somehow direct them at children. 1992 was the same year Batman Returns came out. Not an R-rated movie. On the scare factor level, it might as well. But we've had that video, so.
I think you also have to look into account just how different it is. Where in Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, what was the most amount of characters you saw on screen at one time? 5, 4, 5.
Yeah.
And in Army of Darkness, there's tons of people in it.
Yeah, because it's like, just when you get excited about Evil Dead 2, it's like, oh my god, it's just Ash and it's just him fighting himself. And they bring in new characters, but the great thing they did was the new characters they brought in were still just a small handful.
Yeah.
And it didn't really take away from what was already working.
I mean, I would say Army of Darkness's biggest issue is it's too cinematic. Like, Ash needs to find the book to save these people. Like, that just doesn't feel in the original spirit of the movies.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if we were in Evil Dead 2, Ash would have looked at the group of people and said, fuck off, and it would have stayed, and we would have never seen them again.
Yeah. And there's stuff like some of the techniques, like, to my understanding, a lot of the point of view shots from the first movie and the second movie are literally just Raimi holding the camera and Bruce Campbell's like pushing him on something.
Yeah.
It's like you'd never imagine that's how they created a shot in this.
No.
Like, it would all be like some army of crew.
Yeah, it feels. Do you know what Army of Darkness kind of feels like? And I kind of wonder if this was Sam Raimi's experience with it. Army of Darkness to me kind of feels like, so Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 kind of feel like Wayne's World before Rob Lowe took over, and Army of Darkness is Wayne's World after Rob Lowe took over.
I feel like there was a much more related direction you were going with that, so I was thrown off by in the spirit of the unexpected we've been talking about. The Wayne's World direction also makes sense.
I mean, do you agree with that?
I'm just picturing,
because Wayne's World stays the same show, kinda, but the production values are a lot higher.
And so I just imagine the start of Army of Darkness, and I just imagine Rob Lowe in the booth, like, jamming out to that really tepid song. What I thought the direction you were going to take it was the other Sam Raimi trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
where we had. I mean, there's nothing independent about the first Spider-Man, but when you talk about like the second Spider-Man movie being the one where they're like, we really have to top this, so they went really, really big, and it's considered like one of the best sequels ever. Same for Evil Dead 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 was when the studio got involved and said, we want this, and we want this, and we want this, and it wasn't what Raimi had in mind.
And there's times where, the director getting what they want does have a negative effect. The example you just brought up. The 89 Batman movie is a classic. Tim Burton barely had any control. Once they gave him full control, we got Batman Returns, which you and I enjoy, but the studio, it scared the living shit out of them, and they took us in the Joel Schumacher direction.
As far as it being better when a studio takes over, or when anybody takes over, Richard Kelly is another good example of a director that does not need full control. What else was I about to bring up? Shit. It was when we were on the topic of him doing 2 trilogies, and they both went south in their third one because it was studios wanting to add a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's gone. It'll come back to me long after we turn the cameras off, when it's totally useless.
And the other part that I think feels very studio oriented is the stuff between Ash and Beth Davids. In Evil Dead 2, like, there's kind of an attraction with that girl, but we don't focus on it. It just happens as a result of the heat of the moment. Whereas in Army of Darkness, it definitely feels like this. We want to build something with these two, and then Ash just leaves.
Yeah, the fact that it's so instantaneous makes me want to think it's supposed to be a running joke, because he just starts randomly making out with the S-Mart customer at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
But
Wait a minute. Before we go on, how can we gloss over the fact that in Ash's recap of Army of Darkness, his girlfriend's Bridget Fonda?
Yeah, apparently her part was supposed to be bigger, but there was by the way, here we go. This is the thought I lost. I found it before we turned the cameras off.
Okay.
Another problem was like how many different fucking edits of this movie there are. I think there's like 4 different edits or something, and like that really, Bruce Campbell was especially pissed off about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess they had apparently there was a dispute with using the character of Hannibal to get Silence of the Lambs made.
Uh-huh.
And that dispute kept Army of Darkness from like getting into theaters for like a year, and in that year it wasn't in theaters. They just kept fucking cutting it. And so it's so I'm not sure how much of what Raimi wanted or what Bruce Campbell wanted that we're actually looking at when we watch this. But yeah, and apparently the S-Mart ending is a response to test audiences. Which I don't mind the S-Mart ending. I actually think it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Especially with the lead into it. Like we get the flashback, but I also love the iconic moment where he says, "This is my boomstick."
Mm-hmm.
And that iconic line turns into him basically doing a commercial for fucking S-Mart.
Yeah.
he plugs the shit out of his store.
I mean, you and I, we're kind of ragging on Army of Darkness, but there's still some stuff in it that works and is funny.
Oh yeah, I don't want to undermine it.
And it's because of Bruce Campbell.
Yeah, and there's a lot in the effects here also. I love like the stuff I love the individual things that the army's doing, like the skeletons that are playing like the flute and the bagpipes and the drums. I love the title characters.
What do you think of Bad Ash?
I honestly would have been interested to see I would have loved to have seen Bruce Campbell get to have more fun with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like playing 2 different characters and like having like an evil twin and stuff like that. But I can also understand where it would have there's already so much going on.
Yeah. I do think it's funny when he's trying to give that order and his jaw keeps breaking.
Yeah. But what is great also is you talk about that there's a lot of stuff that's going on here, and it's all stuff because we talk about how unique the first two movies feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like what makes the third one unique is that we're seeing a bunch of stuff we've already seen before. We've seen, a lot of stuff set in the medieval era. We've seen, long battle scenes like that. We've seen skeleton armies and stuff like Jason and the Argonauts.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the comedy style they're going for before. We've seen, if you want to throw a zombie movie into it, we've seen all this stuff before. But without this movie, we never in a million years would have seen all of them together.
Yeah.
Like in one place for 80 minutes. Only 80 minutes all of this stuff is in. And like I said, it's also just commendable in general, just like how nonstop it is for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it does maintain like stellar effects once we get to the more potentially bloated scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But because obviously, if army is in the title, if the word army is in the title of the movie, it's inevitable that we're gonna run into like big battle scenes and stuff like that. But I love that like there's that while there where everybody's battling and Ash is basically just doing commentary.
Yeah.
He's like a wrestling announcer.
It's like he's foreshadowing his role in Spider-Man.
Exactly. All right. So, and he also foreshadowed his part in 3 with somebody ceremoniously giving somebody a piece of jewelry, like in the first Evil Dead, as he did. I don't know that he foreshadowed his part in what did he do in Spider-Man 2? He was the door guy that wouldn't let Peter in.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
So I guess he was doing that by closing the door to the castle from the army.
sure. It's something like that. I mean, obviously, all of this is entirely unintentional. Well, of course, it's unintentional. We were just making a leap with the wrestling announcer thing. That was our own reference. So I don't know what direction I was taking that. I haven't slept yet again, so as usual, I'm not going to remember anything we say here. So that'll be. I'm starting to realize why that happens so often. How I have like hundreds and hundreds of videos, and most of them I don't remember what the hell I said. So, yeah. Especially since I'm getting ready to do like 4 in a row when we're done here.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything else on these?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think this is definitely a series that, a lot of people will tell you about a movie. It's like, oh, you just got to watch it. You just got to watch it. Then you'll see. This is a series I think that's 100% true. You just have to see it. I cannot describe it to you. You have to watch it.
Yeah, guys, I feel like this would be the part in the video where we would rank them. But it's like trying to rank 3 entirely different, unrelated movies almost.
It is. It really is.
I mean, if I had to, based on quality, I'd probably say 2, 1, 3, which is I would say is probably the most.
I think that's most people's rankings, yeah, because that's mine too.
Yeah, but it's like because 2 basically feels like they're doing a parody of 1. I feel like there was. I'm pretty sure it's bounced back, but I felt like there was, and I could be wrong. I could just be imagining this, but I feel like there was a period there where the first one almost lost a little bit of respect because people saw it as easy to parody and too cheesy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because the second movie felt like it was doing a parody of itself, and its own makers were almost doing a send-up of it. But I don't really think that's like the case or anything.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the respect for the first movie is still there. So. Yeah.
I kind of wondered this when I was watching it, and I wonder if you take anything from this. Have you noticed when you went back and rewatched it, the way that the girlfriends that in Ash's moments, the way they're dressed? Because in the first one, his girlfriend's dressed very conservatively. And Ash is a very conservative character at that point. There's not a lot of outlandish stuff. In the second one, his girlfriend's wearing more like a baseball tee style, and it's a little more like tight fitting. And Ash is kind of coming into his own at that point. And then when you get to Bridget Fonda, she's just wearing a tank top, and that's when Ash is balls to the wall.
I love that you noticed that when we literally get one shot of Bridget Fonda. Whole damn thing.
I just wonder if there's any kind of relation there.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
Because you tend to forget just like how much behind the scenes stuff there is for literally every single shot of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Raimi's the kind of guy where I could see him being detail oriented.
And see, what I also think makes it almost on purpose is he did keep the detail where every shirt says Michigan State.
Yeah. That's weirdly observant. I never know. That's the kind of observant we're looking for. So that's why we have you here, for observations like that and for the weird ass tangent.
Well, I've served both purposes today.
And for what better movies to talk about?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like for the movies that we're talking about, today's conversation was kind of tame.
Yeah, we probably could have been crazier.
Yeah. I don't know. You got a little antsy when I brought up Grandmother Willow's Revenge.
All right, so is that it for this one pretty much?
Yeah, I would say so. I just thought of a funny thumbnail that you could do for this video. You could put up like Evil Dead 2 and like Pocahontas and just do a question mark. That would get people going, the fuck?
Well, the next thing we're going to do, we actually have 2 left to do for this month. We're trying to figure out how we're going to do the one that will be much easier to do and quicker to do. Mm-hmm. We're going to do our secret window video, and we have a list video that we're going to end on, which should be our list video should be the last video of the month.
Yeah, it'll be done on Halloween. Yeah,
we'll that's when we'll shoot it, and that's when it'll go up. And hopefully I will have filled in all the days in between by then, because they're all the stuff for those days is planned. I just have to do them.
You just have to sleep so you can do them.
Yeah, but I'm actually going to do 2 more before I even try that. So yeah. So but yeah, we'll get that figured out, and then I said then November will be whatever the hell we want. So
yeah.
All right, so if you don't have anything else to add, I think that's pretty much it for this.
Yeah, we could spend November just talking about the Thanksgiving trailer. There's a month's worth of content in there. In that,
kind of like
and a half.
It's kind of like that guy that's entire YouTube channel is the scene in Spy Kids 3 when Bill Paxton comes down with his umbrella and says, "Somebody ring the Dinkster," and he posts that every single day.
Oh man, so, Bill Paxton, R.I.P.
Yes.
But all right, so
all right, let's end this.